Coming up on this week's show, the Tetris movie is almost here.
A classic puzzle adventure gets re-released.
We get the story of the classic Shadowgate with Dave Marsh.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our wonderful friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one of their books that comes highly recommended is Metal Slug, The Ultimate History. Now, this is a comprehensive guide to the popular shoot-'em-up franchise with unrivaled access to SNK's archives, designers and developers. You can get that and the rest of their retro gaming collection. Have a look right now at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 364, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the podcast that each and every week takes you on a nostalgic trip back to the golden age of video games, brings you up to speed on all the happenings in the world of retro from over the last week, and gives you exclusive access to some of the biggest names in the industry. And what a guest we've got for you this week. We'll tell you more about that in just a minute. And Joe the Man Fox been reveling this weekend at a stag do in Budapest. Are you feeling all right, Joe? You're going to be energetic this morning?
I am. I'm really rough. I keep muting myself to cough.
I can hear it in your voice, Joe.
Yeah. I've actually been back 2 days, but you know how these things go.
Yeah, for those outside the UK, stag do, a bachelor party, essentially, isn't it? You're at over the weekend. Yeah. Quick question though, you're in Budapest. Did you do any retro game shopping while you were out there?
Oh, you know what? So we had an Airbnb. There was like 18 of us, so we got this massive like hostel essentially all to ourselves, and we were right next to the building next to us was a game shop, and I was like, what the hell? I looked through the window and it was all modern stuff. And then on the Sunday, that was like the civilized day, if you will. And we went and went and sat in a cafe and had like we weren't like slamming drinks that day. And I had a little Google, and there was actually 3 retro game shops in the area. And they were all like within a 15-20 minute walk from the town centre, but they were all closed on the Sunday. So I missed out, unfortunately. I mean, Google said they were retro game shops, whether they were or not.
It's probably safe that you didn't go on the drinking game day to the retro gaming clubs. You know, that could have ended badly.
That could have ended really badly.
I was going to say, though, because on my bachelor party that we had in Leeds a few years ago, we actually did end up going retro gaming shopping the day after, didn't we?
You were walking around with, I think it was Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, and there were a few other weird CDI games that you got. So, yeah.
I got a stack of CDI games that day, so it was actually quite fruitful, that little visit to Leeds. So, glad you're feeling slightly better, though, Joe. Get on the Alka-Seltzer and the ibuprofen, you'll be all right.
Happy fine.
But we have got an amazing guest to talk to this week on the podcast. Now, this is something that we covered a couple of weeks ago, that Shadowgate is getting an official sequel now. Shadowgate, back in the day, very popular adventure game. Part of it was called the MacVenture series originally from ICOM Games back in the early to mid-80s. And then I think really Shadowgate, from what I've seen, even though it wasn't a game I was too familiar with as a kid, I do know it was a popular title on the NES as well, which was quite rare for a kind of point-and-click adventure game to get ported successfully to a console.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not usually the route that these ones go, is it? They usually stay on a home computer system, but to get that console port is quite interesting. And then you've also got, ICOM ended up getting taken over by Viacom, who were the, owners of MTV and Nickelodeon as well. So you had a lot of that kind of MTV franchises, stuff like Beavis and Butthead, and then also that Rocko's Modern Life as well, which was when Nickelodeon was just getting cool. I remember stuff like Johnny Bravo and the Powerpuff Girls. There was all these cool franchises coming out.
Yeah, and ICOM, kind of going back to their earlier games on the Mac, they were quite innovative as well, because obviously the Mac was a GUI system from day one. You had the icons, menus, pointers.
Yeah.
And before that, most text adventure games were typing, weren't they? And then they came along. Obviously, we had Sierra and LucasArts that did it a bit later, but it was very innovative, the fact that they used the Mac's Windows system to make an adventure game around rather than just having it all typing.
And it's kind of like they went from Apple II into Macintosh as well, and the changes that happen with those two different systems.
Now, I did play the original Shadowgate last week before we did this interview, because I mean it's had a load of updates over the years. It's come out on many different platforms. Well, I downloaded an emulator and played it on the original Mac. I've got to say, I found it very difficult to play.
It's notoriously tough, Dan.
Yeah, that's the thing. I thought, God, am I just awful at this game? But actually, no, it is brutal. A lot of those games back then were. I mean, you make a little mistake, it could cost you your life. But really, we're here from this week's guest, which is Dave Marsh, who was actually behind the original Shadowgate and worked for Icom back in the day. Kind of some of the design decisions that you had around that original Shadowgate game and what it was like working for Icom and then going into their kind of CD-ROM era as well, because around the early 90s, they got into making some of those early FMV games like Dracula Unleashed and the Sherlock Holmes games that came out on platforms like the CDI and the Commodore CD-TV. And then, like you mentioned, kind of going into that Viacom era when he was working on Super Nintendo games like Roadrunner and Daffy Duck. So, quite a varied decade he had at Icom and then going into Viacom. But it's very timely as well because finally there is going to be an official sequel to Shadowgate called Beyond Shadowgate that launches on Kickstarter next weekend. So we thought we'd chat to Dave about the history of Shadowgate and Icom and also hear all about bringing the franchise back for a new generation as well. So I found this one really interesting and I'm sure you will as well. Dave Marsh, our special guest, he'll be on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, before we do that, obviously first half of the podcast, we like to bring you up to speed on what's been happening in the world of retro over the last week. And this was something that I remember us talking about, must have been 2 or 3 years ago now, that they were making a Tetris movie. And I think it's fair to say, we were all a bit skeptical at first, weren't we?
I thought they would go the route of kids' movies, so it'd be like, I'm the square block, and I've got an identity crisis or something, you know. Yeah.
I thought they would go like down the route of like space battle, like it's like it's like a galactic battle and the shapes of spaceships or something like that. I actually completely forgot that this was being made / coming out, but I do remember as being skeptical, like you said, Dan. But it's actually gone really quiet for quite some time. And reading this article, they actually filmed it and finished making it in 2021. So, I mean, either they've just been sitting on it for the right time or it's a truly terrible movie. But back to our point is it's actually a story of, it's a biopic, isn't it? It's a story of how Tetris got made and how Nintendo got a hold of it and stuff like that. You know, I forget his name, but the Russian guy. It's based on him, isn't it?
I can never say it. Pritchov, Alex. And
Pajitnov.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating story. I'm so glad that they've gone this route because it's... Tetris was made when it was made in under the Soviet Union, and it's made. You know, he was a Soviet engineer, and it was made for this system, which was a Soviet computer called the Electronic Nika 60, and all the property that was made under the Soviet Union, obviously under communism, it wasn't like yours. You didn't have ownership on it. You couldn't get any royalties. It became property of the Soviet Union. So that ended up getting sold on. But at that time, you know, you've got the Cold War going on and you've got money probably coming from the sale of Tetris going into, you know, outdoing each other with missiles or the space race. And that whole kind of, you know, communism, Soviet Union versus the West, I think would play really well into a movie. And also about the rights of it as well, because he never actually owned the rights or got royalties, and then eventually went over to America when he was invited, and then he got a reacquisition of the rights and you know, eventually managed to get royalties from the games. But there was a period that he had the one of the most popular games in the world. Everyone was playing it and he wasn't seeing a penny.
And it is an interesting story about the rights of it as well, because I know there was different rights on home computers.
Yeah.
I remember like Microsoft and Spectrum Holobyte, they had like rights to do it on certain machines. And then obviously Nintendo, you know, that was basically the seller of the Game Boy, really, wasn't it? You know, the Game Boy wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful as it was if Tetris hadn't been bundled with it. And I've got a feeling, I can't remember how many copies it sold. I'm trying to find it here on Google, but I can't find any information. I've got a feeling I heard once it was like 2 200 million or something.
202 million copies. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely got to be up there in like the most popular video games of all time. And this movie's coming to Apple TV in March. So next month it's going to land on Apple TV. But yeah, basically what it is, I mean, in my mind, when we heard about the Tetris movie, I was picturing something like Tron.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I
I just have this association with my head where it's like, you know, the movie's going to be a kid's movie or something like that, where this looks like it's more down the kind of Halt and Catch Fire.
They've already announced
style.
it's going to be rated an R because of language and stuff like that.
Yeah, and
it's definitely an adult.
The
film.
whole war stuff they can add into there, but also like, you know, it originally came from this like little puzzle game that they had, Tetramines and Minos, Tetraminos. That's it, and that kind of puzzle game influenced it. So it's going to be that kind of story of creation, and this film looks exactly like the kind of one that I want to see. You know, if they're going to do it.
Yeah, it just looks like the aesthetic of it from what I've seen in the screenshots as well. That looks really good, I think. And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if you guys saw, there was an Australian kind of made-for-TV movie that came out a few years ago about Julian Assange.
No.
Yeah.
The WikiLeaks founder. It looks kind of very similar to that in terms of look.
You know what I think? I think it's good for a new audience, because a lot of kids these days are not going to know about growing up in a society where you have like a government computer, all the properties owned by the government as well, and kind of, you know, people are used to us all having the same systems, or all having Apple or Windows, you know, and just seeing this kind of different world, it will be something so alien to a new audience, but they'll be able to connect with it, especially with stuff like competitive Tetris and how big Tetris is nowadays. It will be good for people to see the roots of it.
Although, like Joe mentioned, it is R-rated, so yeah, don't show it to the kids until they're 17.
Yeah.
So that lands on Apple TV next month. Looking forward to that. Now, something else that's landing very soon, and this actually comes out, yesterday when the show comes out, tomorrow at the time we're recording this, and this is a new mobile version of the classic Myst that landed this week for iOS, and I've got to say, I think this looks incredible.
Yeah, so this is a reimagining of the classic first-person adventure Myst. So this was I think it was an updated release of it in 2021.
I've played it on the Oculus Rift in VR, and it looks very similar to this.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether it's the same kind of assets and everything.
So it is the same version. So it's the re-released version in 2021 is coming out on iOS this week. So yesterday, at the point of release. I've never played the Myst games, but this might be finally like my chance to play it. I say chance to play it. I've got it on Sega Saturn, but I've just never sat down with it to play it. But maybe on the move on my iPhone, you know, this could be the way to kind of get me into this game, because I know it is a classic, you know, puzzle adventure game.
Yeah, it will be a bit different on the Saturn, because this is a kind of full video one with, you know, modern effects and rendering, where original Myst was a bit like a fancy slideshow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. When I hear mobile, I think, you know, I want a Nokia 3210 version of this on like an LCD
We've
screen.
got Myst running on the Nokia 3210.
Yeah, that's how
guys.
I'd enjoy Myst. But this does look impressive.
Yeah, so
like I said, I played it a bit in VR, and I didn't last very long in it. And I've got it on, I think, Xbox Game Pass. It was on there a while ago, and I downloaded it on there. The original Myst to me, though, I mean, I remember when that first came out. Was it like 93, I think Myst came out?
Yeah.
I remember seeing screenshots of it in magazines, though, and just being like, couldn't believe the graphics.
Yeah.
It was one of
graphics just
it was one of the first titles that sold CD-ROM massively. When I remember seeing CD-ROMs in shops, I'd go in and it'd just be Myst. And yeah, that really like helped spur on the industry. But also, I've played it on the M1, and they're saying here, you know, it's on the A12 chip devices, which is basically like a supercharged version of the M2 chip. So there's a lot of like native ports as well, because Myst was really popular on the Mac. It was one of those kind of big Mac gaming titles as well.
Yeah, and interestingly, Dan, you are right. It is 93, because it's actually, this is to celebrate the 30-year anniversary of Myst. So it is actually the 30th anniversary. That's why they are re-releasing it on iOS. And like you say, Ravi, they are saying it's going to be an enhanced version with it running on the next generation M2 chip. So hopefully it'll look really, really nice.
Because I remember getting Myst on, I did get it on the Amiga when it came out later on, and I've gone back and played the original PC version. I think it's on the 3DO as well, actually, but it's a very, very difficult game. And I think it's not something that's aged very well for modern audiences. I think, the original Myst, when playing that, it is one of those you had to sit down literally with like a notepad by your side and make notes as you went through the game to progress and remember things. Whereas I don't think many modern players would do that. From briefly playing the VR version, which again looked absolutely gorgeous, all I've done so far is have a little wander around for about half an hour in it.
I think it had a lot more hints and help in the
it definitely does.
It doesn't leave you so confused on the island,
Well, that's the thing with Myst. It doesn't really give you any context. You just kind of dropped into this mystery world, and then you kind of left to figure it out yourself. So, it's very intriguing, and I think it's definitely got kind of an otherworldly feel to it. I've always loved the atmosphere of Myst. And even in the original games, like I said, the stunning rendered graphics, even though it was a slideshow and it didn't move, but you had beautiful sound effects in there as well. And it's definitely got a really unique feel. So I think this looks a really nice way to celebrate the 30th anniversary of it. And interestingly, they're releasing it for free on iOS.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's going to be a free game, but if you want to kind of unlock, there's I think it's $14.99 they're saying, to unlock the other ages of Myst. So like, the stuff like Stone Ship and Mechanical and Channel Wood, like the extra kind of modes in there.
Yeah.
It also looks good that, it supports like gamepads, touchscreen controls, keyboard and mouse as well. So you can use it on your different devices. Like I can imagine it would be quite nice on the iPad.
That might be quite a nice experience on there. Obviously having the big screen. That's one thing about playing it on like an iPhone or something. I think the graphics in Myst, it warrants having a big display because it's so nice.
Yeah, and being able to
look at it on a tiny little screen.
Touch things and move them around and play with them would be quite nice on the iPad.
Yeah, so that is available now on iOS for free if you want to download that. So it should be available when the show comes out. And I put a link to the article and the video in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, we need to talk about a vintage video card that is going for a ridiculous amount on eBay at the moment, and a long-lost arcade game that's being discovered in just a sec. Before we do that, let's just pause for just a quick moment to give a big thank you to this episode's sponsor, and that is our wonderful friends at Babbel. Now, did you guys ever learn languages at school?
Yes, French, and I'm still not very good at it.
German, and I still barely know how to speak any of it, and I did it for 5 years.
That is one thing for people outside the UK. You might not realise this, but yeah, we do have to learn a language at school. But generally, nobody I know ever had success in learning languages at school. I did both French and German. And if I try to count to 10 in French, it generally changes to German when I get to about number 6. So they kind of merge together in my mind. One thing that definitely here in us Brits, we've always been known around the world for sometimes being a bit lazy and not learning other languages, and maybe the way we get taught in school is, wasn't really a high point of our academic careers, to put it that way. But now there is something that you definitely need to check out, an addictive, fun, easy way to learn a new language. And that is thanks to our friends at Babbel. Now, maybe you're traveling abroad this year, going to be going away for the summer. Maybe you've got family abroad as well. Babbel teaches bite-sized language lessons that you'll actually use in the real world. So it makes learning a new language quick and easy because it focuses on natural conversation. And I think that's where we went wrong at school. I don't know if you guys are the same. I've got memories of being there with a tape recorder, wearing a headset and trying to learn how to ask for the bank or directions to the beach.
Yep, just words, just being like how to say the colour red, how to say fish, how to say swimming. Things you would never actually say or ask for. The things that you want to know is where's the nearest restaurant? Not necessarily how do I do my taxes when you're on holiday in France.
I can say a la piscine, I think, which is go to the swimming pool. That was one that I always remember.
Handy when you need an emergency swim in Paris, Rafi. Yeah, but Babbel gives you 50-minute language lessons that are designed to be the most efficient and effective way to learn a new language, created by over 150 language experts. So that means real people. You'll learn how to have real-world conversations and things you're going to use, not those meaningless phrases that we all used in school. And the interactive lessons aren't robots talking. They're voiced by native speakers using modern conversation-based methods as well. So it's not going to be like, the textbooks you read at school or the audio tapes you listened to from the 1970s. You're going to be speaking in no time confidently about real-life topics in another language. And their methods have been scientifically proven to be effective as well. And you can pick from 14 different languages, including Spanish, French, Italian, and German. And what I think is really cool is Babbel has got speech recognition technology that will help you improve your pronunciation and even your accent as well. Because that's one thing I always worry about, trying to do like a French accent when you're talking in it. Is it going to sound naff? But it'll actually give you advice and feedback on that as well. So there's loads of ways to learn with Babbel. In addition to their lessons, you can access podcasts, games, videos, even join their live classes with a language teacher as well. So start your new language learning journey today with Babbel. And of course, we always get you some incredible offers on this show. They're giving Retro Hour listeners 3 months completely free with a purchase of a 3-month subscription. So all you have to do is use our promo code right now. Head to this website, babbel.com/podcast23. That is babbel.com/podcast23. Use the promo code retro and you will get an extra 3 months completely for free. Thanks to our friends at Babbel, language learning that works. And of course, I'll put that in our show notes as well. Now let's talk about this. A long-lost arcade game that's been found. Now, this is something that's been rumoured and kind of talked about for many years now, but now this is a game that was released in Japan in a limited run back in 1999. There was a collaboration between Namco and Sony.
Are you a big fan of Jammy Lammy, Ravi?
To be honest, I've played it a couple of times, but it's one that I've not jumped into. I kind of stuck with Prapper the Rapper, and then I saw that there was like Space Channel later on, and then there was Jamalami as well. That was on PS1, wasn't it?
Yeah, so like you say, it was the kind of like spin-off sequel to Papa the Rapper. But this arcade machine is Jamalama now. Like Dan says, it came out in 1999 in a limited release in Japan, and it's been thought to be a lost arcade machine. Now, for those who don't know, it's essentially a rhythm game, isn't it? On the PlayStation, it's raps, it's music and stuff like that, and you play along to it on the controller. And in the first game, Papa the Rapper, you rapped. In the second game, Jamalama, you played the guitar. So this arcade machine, it looks very similar to Guitar Hero to me. And you have like buttons on the controller and you press them, as the buttons come up on the screen to the rhythm. And then it has a very distinct graphical style, like a very shell-shaded, like cartoon 2D style. Like they look like cardboard cutouts, but I think it really suits the style.
It was kind of from the same franchise. So you had Masaya Matsura, who did the original music with Prapper the Rapper, and then also the art as well, Rodney Greenblatt, and then that kind of went on to the next games, and also Space Channel later on. But it was all kind of part of that series, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I had absolutely no idea there was an arcade game of it. But like we say, it was limited to Japan. But what's happened is it's been found in a private collection by somebody in Japan. So somebody posted a Reddit link about it, kind of saying, look, there's this game like Jamalama, the arcade machine. And somebody's come forward and said, I have this arcade machine in my private collection. And they've actually been happy to dump the ROM online to ensure that it's preserved for future generations. So they're actually in the moment, getting the ROM, and they're going to dump it online so people can play it and have, and check it out and stuff like that. And I think that's really fantastic because there's so many of these obscure kind of like, cult classic games. You then find out have like a weird offshoot arcade or a different version of it. Like there's the Street Fighter 2 cabinet, where I think there's one left in the world where it's the whack-a-mole, but they're all little M. Bisons, and you have to hit them, and Street Fighter 2 plays out on the screen. Like there's only one of that left in the world, apparently. And I don't think the ROM for that's been dumped or anything like that. I mean, that you'd struggle with that one because it's a whack-a-mole game. But with this one, it is ultimately the rhythm game, and you can play it with the controller, I guess. So it's really cool to see that happening. And, hopefully a few more people will come out and say, look, we've spotted these ones in Japan and stuff like that.
It's kind of like the Guitar Hero one. I remember there was the Guitar Hero arcade units as well.
But
it looks a lot more fun, this does, and a lot cooler.
It's definitely got that kind of like hippie cool vibe to it. I do really love it. I think it blows my mind when these things, especially with like the video game industry being as big as it is now, that these things get lost, over the decades.
It's interesting as well because from reading the thread on Reddit, it appears that the guy who's found this in his collection, was based in the UK.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's interesting how the game's got over here. And why is it such a rare game? Do we know? Did they just not make many of them?
I don't know, to be perfectly honest, because, Papa the Rapper and Jamilami, I remember, a lot of kids played them at school, and a lot of my friends go they still sing it, the Onion Man song at the start of Papa the Rapper, and, me and my brother still do the Jamilami, because we had it on PlayStation, and that was how the game introed. So to me, it doesn't feel like it's an obscure, rare game. It feels like it was quite a big game, but, maybe it was just that the arcade cabinet was just really rare. They just
maybe they just didn't roll it out. Maybe only a few of them came out, and then this collector managed to get hold of it, and there wasn't a huge rollout of them.
Well, I was thinking in 1999, I mean, over here, arcades were kind of fading away by that point, so that could be a reason why there's not many of them kind of in Europe and the UK, I guess.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. And then the guy who has it in his collection, perhaps he's a big, Jamalama fan, and he needed to get hold of it, or maybe he's a big arcade collector and maybe has a warehouse full of arcade machines. You just don't know. But it's interesting. And now there is some footage, there's some short videos of people, loading it up and playing it, would have been posted on the Reddit feed, which is really cool. And
like you said, I mean, looking at it as well, in terms of control scheme, it doesn't look like there's anything kind of custom on there that you couldn't emulate. It looks pretty simplistic in terms of gameplay. I mean, there's not any controls that you're not going to be able to emulate in MAME on there.
Yeah.
So I think, hopefully that will be something that we can emulate quite easily. So I always love seeing lost arcade games and lost anything just kind of get found. And particularly when the people that own them are willing to share it with the rest of the community, because there's nothing worse than when you hear about, a once in a lifetime find on some thrift market in California, and the guy's like, no, it's mine. I'm not sharing it with anyone. It dies with me.
Yeah.
It just never feels fair, does it?
No, exactly. And that's why I was saying I think it's great that they are going to dump it. And like you say, you will get these skeptics, but I think we'll have it in no time.
Yeah, so if you want to see the video footage of that so far, it's up on Twitter. I think he's put a few clips on YouTube as well, but I'll link up that Reddit thread and an article as well in our show notes at theretrohour.com or on your podcast app. Now, graphics cards are something that tend to age pretty quickly, particularly in recent years with all the crypto miners rinsing them, pretty quick until they die. Not the kind of thing that generally sells for much money, particularly a graphics card that is 20, 25 years old now. However, there is one currently on eBay that is selling, at the time of recording this podcast, I think there is 4 days left on it, and the current bid is $14,100.
And
that's because this is a very rare 3DFX card.
And is that on bid? That's not buy it now or anything like that?
That is current bid, and there are 63 bids on eBay at the moment. Now, there is still time if you've got I've got a feeling this is going to go even higher than that over the weekend. I mean, that's the thing with eBay. Generally, you get the big bids right at the end, in the last hour or two. So I've got a feeling, when this ends, Monday at 3:38 a.m. UK time, so there might still be a chance to get in there and put your bid in over the weekend if you want one of these in your collection. Now, the thing is, these are rare because there's only ever about 1,000 of them made.
Well, yeah, but also you say that graphics cards aren't expensive. Voodoo cards are. Voodoo are the most kind of sought after old school graphics card, and it's because they're so good at doing a certain period of time of gaming. I in the Amiga scene, we used to go for the Voodoo 3000 PCI, and which would work with certain drivers as well. And, each Voodoo card has its own period of time where it can do certain amazing things. Now, this one seems to be one of the later cards. And
I think it was the last ever one, I think.
Yeah, and it's AGP. It's pretty big. You've got 4 huge fans on there as well. And it's interesting because this is all about the anti-aliasing effects as well. So it can do 8 times FSAA. And, some of these features are really good at the time. And this was kind of before all of the other cards came in and, that the whole scene kind of changed. But I guess this is looking like one of the peak, best, highest quality AGP cards that you can get. I could be wrong there because I'm not detailed on AGP, but I know a lot of people talk about Voodoo cards a lot with a lot of love for them.
Well, I remember the original Voodoo cards. I mean, I've never really been much of a PC gamer. I was an Amiga gamer really until 2001. I mean, I had a PC then. I think my first graphics card was an NVIDIA GeForce 2 that I got in like 99, 2000. And even that was only to play, like Curse of Monkey Island and that kind of thing. I was never really pushing the boundary too much with them. And then ever since then, I mean, I got back into gaming big style in like, mid 2000s. And then I've been console all the way ever since then, really. But yeah, in terms of the original Voodoo cards, I do remember reading about them though. And originally the Voodoo cards, they were just 3D accelerators, weren't they? So you'd actually need a 2D graphics card in your PC. And then you'd run a pass-through cable into the Voodoo card that handled all the 3D effects. And really, they were made for Quake.
Yeah, and for that hardware acceleration as well, which was something that I hadn't had before. It'd always been software acceleration. And then you suddenly have this box when you've got the new card and select hardware acceleration. And it's like, oh my God, this has totally changed stuff because you're taking the whole load off the main machine. And yeah, they were definitely a changing point. And I think there's a lot of kind of like older games that really still struggle with emulation or just won't run as nicely without some of these classic cards.
Well, this card that we're talking about here is the 3DFX Voodoo 5 6000. And this came very late in the game. I mean, 3DFX went bust in 2002 and then got acquired by NVIDIA, who bought all their rights and designs and everything after that. But this was, really late in the game, for 3DFX fans. This was a card that they made a prototype version of it, but it appears from looking at screenshots and stuff online, there was like a box and stuff made for it as well. So it kind of looks like it was ready to kind of be pushed out commercially. But they only ever made around 1,000 of these prototypes. Now, this is a 128 megabyte graphics card, like you said, AGP, quite ahead of its time as well, featuring 4 processors on here as well. But apparently they reckon because of the high production cost and the power demands as well, that caused the release of these to be delayed, and then 3DFX went bankrupt, meaning that there's not many of these out there on the market, essentially. So that's really why these cards are very hard to get. Although, interestingly, I think we did cover this about a year ago, that there was a kind of fan remake of it, like a reverse engineering.
Yeah, there was, and I think it was like it was really popular, and I think you might have been able to change like the modes on it as well, and kind of emulate different cards.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that if you want to get a little reminder on that. There's a guy, basically the graphics chips on there are still available, so he didn't rip apart one of these very rare cards or anything. He just kind of recreated it from the plans. And I think he made it a PCI card rather than an AGP. But, if you've ever wanted one of these cards and you're not willing to pay the extortionate amount that it's currently going for on eBay, then that could be a good way to get hold of one. So I'll link up that as well. But, it's weird, isn't it? These cards, I bet if you got one of these prototypes 20 years ago, they were probably giving them away, or you could have bought one for like a tenner back in 2002.
It's weird, yeah.
No idea these things would be valuable.
How did these get out into the public? It's very odd.
But it's just how rare stuff kind of increases so much in value.
Yeah.
Over time, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like, these would have been worthless 20 years ago. And the fact that now, God, you could have bought a house for like, £30,000.
But the amount of the amount of trade shows and computer shows I've been to where you've just got a plastic box that's just like graphics card, £5 each or something. It's just full of old school cards. I'd love to pull one of these out of it.
It makes me wonder how many of these are sat in people's old computers on a landfill somewhere as well.
Or how many of them went in a skip.
Yeah.
When people threw out their machines, which was that's probably why things become even more rare. But that is available on eBay now. So if you want to put a bid in, you've got till Monday morning at just before 3 a.m. So I'll link that up in our show notes as well. And there's one more story to quickly talk about before we get into this week's special guest. You guys are a fan of roguelike games?
I've struggled to get into them, to be perfectly honest. But maybe this is the one to get into after playing a bit of Amiga last week. Now I'm an Amiga fan.
I don't even know what they are.
They're basically like turn-based games.
Yeah, they're kind of like I'm not 100% sure myself, but I always hear like this rogue game. Oh, this like they're kind of like dungeon crawler, collectathon kind of games.
Okay.
I don't want to. I don't play them, so I'm not 100% sure.
Well, Rogue was originally a game that came out back in the early 80s.
Right.
I've got a feeling it was just on like mainframes and mini computers, that kind of thing. Called Rogue, and that was a dungeon crawler game.
Right.
But really, it's now a subgenre of RPGs, essentially, role-playing games.
Right.
But, they're kind of, like a lot of role-playing games, you've got that fantasy kind of thing going through in the narrative. Really, it's influenced from tabletop role-playing games. So that's a big thing about them, that generally turn-based games.
Right.
And the graphics are quite simplistic. I mean, the original Rogue, I think, was like an ASCII-based game.
Okay.
So just, text characters. The only one I really got into was there was a Rogue version of Doom.
Right.
That LGR did a video on, probably about 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I downloaded that. It's a free game, probably still available out there if you want to download it. And I ended up playing that loads. I got really into it. And it was a load of fun. So I'm quite a big fan of the genre. Definitely something I'd like to explore more. But now it looks like there is a really nice new roguelike game called Roguecraft on the Amiga. And this looks really nice graphically.
Yeah, this, I think, at a glance, it looks like a very early PS1 2D game, or like a very, very graphically, enhanced Super Nintendo game, but it's running on the Amiga. Now, I believe this is a port of a game called Rogue 64, which was a homebrew for the Commodore 64. But just visually, obviously it's a dungeon crawler, and it's turn-based, and you kind of move along. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like Diablo as well, and you move around like on squares, and then obviously, you go through the dungeon, and there's like a map in the corner to kind of show you where you are and everything like that. And it is like a collectathon, and obviously battling monsters and stuff. And it has got tabletop vibes, definitely, like, D&D kind of vibes to it. But I think graphically, the thing is with me and the Amiga is I always see it and I think that looks awful. Like, these games, and then these homebrews come out, like these versions of Castlevania, and and it just always looks like this is what the Amiga could do. It's just there's so much kind of like politics behind it, where games were getting rushed out and like made in like 2 weeks, Street Fighter ports where they got rushed out and stuff like that. And then you see these games like, Roguecraft, and they just look absolutely amazing. This is what, like, it's very like, this is what you could have had,
It's also kind of like, you don't know the library that well. So there are a few games like this that kind of have this really nice art style and this kind of dark, but it's kind of like, with the Amiga, you're probably going for like platformers and stuff like that, where there were a few like of these kind of exploration or dungeony kind of vibes. But this one looks very impressive with the kind of, procedural generation that they've got on there, as well as the kind of, the maze area. You've got darked out sections as well. I quite like that, where you have the fog that, reveals certain parts of it.
Yeah.
I think Joe was right there as well in terms of, there were some, a lot of graphically stunning games on the Amiga back in the day, but I think just the fact that anyone could make games for the Amiga and there was no real bar of quality, no quality control. Whereas, you want to make a game for the Super Nintendo, you had to submit that game to Nintendo for their approval, get the cartridges made. They had, even for a while, they had the Nintendo seal of approval, didn't they? They put on games.
Yeah, but like this looks like something that's kind of like Dartmare or something like that. It's got a pretty similar style to a certain genre on Amiga.
And there are some very impressive Amiga games coming out right now. I mean, I was watching Modern Vintage Gamers video that he made a couple of weeks ago about new Amiga games. And, Amiga Build did one last year, didn't they? Talking about 10 new Amiga games that you need to play. And there just feels like there's so much coming out on that platform now that it's a really, really, probably the best time to be an Amiga gamer I can remember in the last 20 years in terms of new releases.
Yeah.
That's coming out on the platform. So, this is a work in progress at the moment. No official release date as yet, but if you want to check out that so far, a brilliant Roguecraft game for the Amiga, we'll link that up. And all the rest of the stories, you'll find them at theretrohour.com. Now, we're going to be going deep inside the world of Shadowgate with this week's special guest, Dave Marsh. He's coming up in just a second. Before we chat to Dave, let's take a quick moment to give a big thank you to another very loyal supporter of the Retro Hour podcast, and that is our amazing friends at ExpressVPN. And whenever we talk about ExpressVPN, I mean, we talk about privacy and how important it is. Because, I mean, I've got friends who will open an incognito tab in Chrome and think that's it. They're completely secure, completely private. No one can see what they're doing. But that's not the case, is it?
No. So ExpressVPN actually reroutes your internet connection, which is great because it means your ISP can't see the sites you're visiting. And you may wonder why that could be bad. You know, in the USA, people can sell on your information to ad companies, which is pretty bad. But, you know, ExpressVPN is so simple to use as well. I use it all the time. It's really fast. You can have it so it auto connects straight away, runs in the background of your PC or on your Mac or any of your devices, and basically keeps you secure.
Yeah, and they've got these really secure servers, and your ISPs can't see what websites you're visiting. They can't track you. It keeps all of your information secure by encrypting 100% of your data with the most powerful encryption available. And I know you have it on like auto boot on your devices, rather. You don't. I mean, you never go online without ExpressVPN. Runs seamlessly in the background. You got it on our phones, computers. Got it on a smart TV as well. So there's no excuse not to be using ExpressVPN. And actually, they're rated the #1 VPN by sites like Business Insider. So we'd like to give you an exclusive offer here as well to protect your online activity with 3 months extra free on a 1-year package of ExpressVPN. So if you're thinking of giving it a try, we'll give you 3 months for free by using our link expressvpn.com/retro, expressvpn.com/retro. And thanks very much to our good friends at ExpressVPN for their continued support of our show. Just a quick reminder as well that a really good way to support this podcast, if you don't join us on Patreon or anything like that, is just to leave us a little review. That always really helps. I think the last review that we had on Apple Podcasts was in November last year. So it was about 3 months ago now. So literally, it'll take you a couple of seconds. Give a little 5-star review on there. If you leave a few nice comments as well, that helps the algorithms, get us in the podcast charts and get us in front of new people. That is a really simple way you can help us out. So leave us a little 5-star review and a comment on your podcast app of choice if it allows it. That always really helps the show. And next, we're going to be going inside the world of Shadowgate with this week's special guest, the wonderful Dave Marsh. Next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for our favourite part of the show when we welcome on a special guest, a veteran of the industry, to share their history, their stories, their time working in the industry, and the projects that they're working on today. And today we are joined by the founder of Zoojoy, and behind classic games like Shadowgate. He worked with Icom Simulations back in the day. Let's welcome on Dave Marsh. Hey, Dave.
Gentlemen, a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Now, we're all big adventure game fans on this podcast, so we can't wait to hear some memories of classics like Deja Vu and Shadowgate. But before we get into that, I mean, it's always nice to kind of find out where our guest's journey began. I mean, do you remember what initially got you into video games and what was kind of your first ever experience?
Yeah, I lived outside of Chicago. I think it was probably it was in the late 70s that I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and we weren't that far from Lake Geneva, right? Where Gary Gygax started D&D. And so every now and then my mom or one of my friends' moms would drive us over there, and we'd go to this little shop called The Dungeon. And sometimes Gygax would be there, and we would talk, and, all they had was the books and lead miniatures. And, we would spend time doing that. And so I just spent a lot of time drawing and playing D&D and drawing and stuff. And my folks bought me a computer. I don't even know what it was. It might have been something from Radio Shack. It may have been something that I seem to remember buying it out of some guy's trunk, to be honest. And it had an art program on it. And it was basically, I could probably place a total of maybe 200 pixels on the screen and with a little joystick. And that's all I did day in and day out when I had time was to draw monsters and spaceships and other things on this, cassette loading PC. And so that's kind of my first first memories is doing, I kind of felt that was my deal. That was my gig. That was my future, was pixel art at that time. Right. So that's my earliest memory. Yeah.
Was that a color machine, or was it,
It was
black and white?
It was color. It was, there was probably 8 colors is my guess. And the program was really archaic. The 8 colors would be at the bottom of the screen, and you would bring the joystick, the cursor down to the bottom and select a color and bring it up to the top and hit the button and place the color. But you couldn't place it twice. You had to go back down to the bottom again. So it was a lot of minutia, right? And so, that was my first thing. And then I would every day after school, I would go to the library, and they would have a modem there, a PC with a modem, and it was connected to the local community college. And there was a program on there called Kingdom, and it was just basically a text MUD. And you would just say, go north, go south, go east, go west. And you'd encounter a monster, and you would press 1 to fight and 2 to run. And I played that half an hour a day for years.
So you got your kind of foundation through Dungeons and Dragons and MUDs then, of kind of adventure titles. And you ended up getting an Apple II and then programming on that as well.
Yeah. So that was, I picked up an Apple II, and this was the first thing I had done for ICOM simulations. I had met programmer and I had an Apple II, and they were doing ports of various games. And do you remember the game Wizards of War, the arcade game?
Yeah.
I ported that to the Apple II, and I may have done I think I may have done Joust as well. But that was the first thing, because I was used to doing pixel art and I liked it. I didn't mind that minutia. So yeah, first thing was the Apple II.
It's quite interesting you're doing arcade ports then. Because you mentioned that adventure game that you're playing via the terminal, the dial-up terminal.
Yeah.
Were you playing many adventure games on the Apple II as well?
Only probably. Do you remember Venture? That's probably it. I was probably playing that game, but I ended up in, I think, my freshman year in high school. So this would be 70, maybe 78 or so. They had one of those card-based PCs where you would punch the cards, and I created my own adventure game set in outer space, and on these cards, and you just fed these cards into this thing. I don't remember really how it worked, but it was the only thing I had actually written, because I'm not a programmer. I mean, that's not the way my brain works. But that was the first. That kind of got me hooked on kind of that adventure game thing. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned ICOM simulations there. I mean, how did you get involved with them, and what was kind of the background of that company?
Yeah, so ICOM at that point had just, the Mac had just come out, right? And they were working and finishing up Deja Vu and Nightmare Comes True, which is a fantastic game. And it was taking advantage of Windows, right? So you could drag the windows around, you could put objects in the inventory, you could drag them back into the world. It was really revolutionary. This was before any of the other adventure games had come out. And so it was really taking advantage of the Mac's power, but having Windows. And I was doing volunteer work at a church, and one of the guys who was volunteer work was programming there, and I was talking to him about it, and he was mentioning that they were working on working on another game, which was The Uninvited, and the art was being done by a fabulous artist named Mark Waterman. And I just said, I'd love to get a chance to work on a fantasy game. And so they got me a Mac, with an external hard drive, which was an external floppy drive. So I didn't have to swap Mac Paint in every other second. But they just my friend Terry Schulenberg, that he was the programmer, he got me the Mac, and I worked on that with my friend Carl Rulofs, who is also the designer of Shadowgate, and in my mom's house, my bedroom, my mom's house, and worked on that for about a year before they liked it enough and gave me a job.
Well, they also had their titles published by Mindscape. What was the kind of relationship with Mindscape like there?
Yeah, Mindscape was a publisher just down the road. I would go there, we would talk, but ICOM was doing I mean, Occam was mostly doing all those ports before they started doing adventure games, all those ports for arcade games and such to the Apple II and making their money that way. And so, and then they were also doing some other software like Tmon, which was the monitor, which was the de facto debugger for the Mac. Everybody, if you were programming on the Mac, you used this and stuff. But yeah, Mindscape was down the road, and there was a guy named Scott Burfield who was the main project managers over there. And, we just, I don't know. I mean, I was just a kid. So, I was just happy to be making games. I have no idea if they were a good publisher or a lousy publisher, but anytime I would, go over to Egghead, which was one of the big gaming, software places, I'd find our games and I'd line them up on the front of the shelf.
That must have been pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how old I was. So that was 85. So I was like 21, and they were paying me nothing. And I was just loving being able to go ahead and do art. And in fact, they asked me to finish up Mark. For some reason, Mark didn't finish up Uninvited. So I ended up jumping in and finishing up the black and white Mac version of Uninvited before finishing Shadowgate.
So were you developing on the Apple II? Because like the Mac came out and there was a big change. What were the differences like, or did you go straight into developing on the Mac?
Yeah, really on the Apple II, I was just using a custom program that they had given me to push pixels around. So outside of that, I was on the black and white, Mac, using McPaint, and that's all I was using. And learning about compression, because everything was about getting the game on a floppy, right? And so McPaint, of course, had all these patterns that was, the brush patterns were what you use. So when I made dungeon walls or whatever else, I made as many patterns as I could, because patterns would compress and not like patterns wouldn't. So it was a constant battle between trying to make the best art and, use the patterns that of the brushes that McPaint would create.
Well, I know on the Apple II, there was the Apple desktop, also known as a mouse desk, which was a graphical user interface for it. Were you using that then, or when you got to the Mac, was that kind of a big jump, learning a graphical user interface over a text command prompt?
And I really don't, it's so many years ago, I really don't remember exactly what I was using at that time, but the jump to the Mac was fairly easy. The tools were so simplistic for McPaint. And then, going from there to, I think the next one was like, Studio One, right? Was the next program. And then there was Studio 8. And then, after a while, we weren't making games on the Mac anymore. And I was working with, what was the Amiga program? Deluxe Paint. Deluxe Paint or Degas on the Atari ST. They were pretty much all the same.
Well, obviously from ICOM, I mean, the Mac Adventure series was legendary, a series of 4 games originally for the Mac, ported to many different systems. I read that they'd since sold over 2 million units combined. So what was kind of the story with the Mac Venture series then? And was that always planned to be like a series of games?
Yeah, it was actually interesting that I look back on it now. If you take somebody like what Richard Garriott did with Ultima and stuff, he created one game, very popular game, and then he made, many sequels of it and stuff. And ICOM really didn't work that way. Our CEO, his name was Todd Zipnick, and he kind of just wanted to do different things, and which was fine and everything. But, we started with Deja Vu, and it was really successful. And, then, I came in, halfway through the Uninvited and finished that up. And then we did Shadowgate and put that, got that out. And then Deja Vu 2 was done by an artist, Julia Ulano. She was in, I think, San Francisco. And so, and I just kind of oversee, a little bit of the story and that kind of thing. But, there was never really a big plan. Hey, let's just continue to do one of these other things beyond Shadowgate. In fact, that all the art, Carl and I had finished all the art for Beyond Shadowgate, and it was halfway programmed before the company decided to stop making those games. At the same time, there were probably 3 or 4 other McVentures that were in some state of development. Todd had friends in Hawaii that wanted to make a game, so he flew me out there once, which was great fun. And it was a game called Helios, and it was about a meteor that was going to hit the Earth, and you needed to assemble parts of a rocket. And it was awful. And so that kind of went on. There was a game called Gossip, which was also going to use Julie as the artist, and you were a gossip columnist in San Francisco, and that wasn't any better. And then I know Carl and I did the complete design spec for a game called The Awakening, which was a werewolf in 19th century London, which was a lot of fun. But by that time, Todd had moved on and wanted to do things like the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective FMV games. We had gotten into, of course, Chemco had come in, and we had worked with them to port the McVentures over to the NES, which was great. But then, we started working on with NEC for their TurboGrafx machine. So it was just kind of like going after chasing the dollar at that point. And then we were also working on, games for Sunsoft, which were all the Looney Tunes titles, Roadrunner and Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny and those kind of things. So the company was just kind of trying to figure out where to find its feet, and eventually got bought by Viacom. So,
well, what were your kind of inspirations then for Shadowgate and the game's design?
Yeah, it was really just D&D, right? And it's not. I'd love to say that it's a great design and adventure, but I don't think it is. I mean, it's pretty. We had kind of, when we talked about it, they said let's just do a standard dungeon type adventure. Find the bad guy, kill him, that bad wizard, whatever, and then from there we'll go ahead and keep expanding that Shadowgate universe, which never really happened. Although we did put Beyond Shadowgate out on the TurboGrafx 16, but it was a side scroller. But so really, it was just playing D&D, and Carl and I would sit around and say, what would be a cool room? And one of the things that we decided, we played a lot of dungeon crawl games like Dungeon Master and I don't remember, a number of games that basically had you in a maze and you just fought monsters. They were RPGs. And so we decided with our game that every room was going to be different. So when you walked in, you said, oh, this is different looking. It didn't matter if it was a lava room right next to an ice room or whatever it was. So that was kind of our big thing, was the fact that you never knew what you were going to encounter in the next room. So, but yeah, cut our teeth on that one with promises of future adventures that never really panned out until I started the company again in 2012.
Adventure games, I imagine, are much more complex to program than, the simple arcade ports you were doing before. I mean, what kind of challenges do you remember when, planning an adventure game? Do you have to kind of map out all the rooms and everything in advance? How does that kind of work?
Yeah, it really was. And the biggest thing was getting it to fit on a floppy. So everything was about, Shadowgate, we probably ended up cutting, I think there's 40 some rooms in that game or whatever. We ended up cutting 10 at least, or 12 and stuff that just wouldn't fit. And, everything was just, hey, do we, where you had other companies putting games on multiple floppies, we just kept saying, how can we get this to fit? So it was really just designing, laying out all the rooms, deciding what the puzzles were going to be. And then giving ourselves these parameters of, this has to be so many bytes so that, it's going to fit on a floppy. And so even in those early games, you'll see that compared to other companies, there was compared to, the NES game was the first one to actually have music for our games, like Shadowgate, Undivided Deja Vu 2. I mean, they were really, the first time that music was in, and the big reason was that there was just no room. We put some sound effects in that we found or made ourselves or whatever, but that was the biggest hurdle. Sure.
Yeah, sound effects on that simple Mac speaker. The Mac didn't have the best audio, did it? Out of all the machines.
I don't think I think Apple's come a long way.
Well, how did you take advantage of the Mac's graphical user interface? Because a lot of the previous adventure games that I was aware of were basically just type-in games.
Yeah, so those were just, your multi-user dungeon games or your adventure games, which is, Zork, right? Which is fabulous game. But kudos to the guys, before I got there, who came in and said, not only does the Mac have the ability to have windows that you can open and close and shrink and, move objects between, but we're going to make a game that works with that. And Deja Vu is just a great example of how that works, gathering evidence, putting it in there, making sure that, like if you go to the police and you have the evidence that you need to go ahead and show that you're not the killer, but you have a something in there that could be a little, sketchy, your evidence, I mean, Windows looked and said, hey, what's in that folder, that you have open on your, on the desktop, right? But so just taking advantage of the Windows, interface and all that bit and the command system was really revolutionary at the time. There was really nothing else like it. And that's what we heard when Chemco came to us and said, hey, we want to port your games to the NES. We just kind of laughed because like, there's just no way it's going to work. And it worked really great. And, especially when you had games, almost every game that was out at that time on the NES were all side scrollers. And you had this game that was this first person adventure. And we really were the first person adventures out there. So it was pretty nifty.
Oh, it was also a pretty brutal game. Like, a simple mistake could kind of cost you a life in that title. Was like this sense of danger or something, an idea of, a threat, something that you wanted to go big on?
I think most of it is something like Shadowgate is definitely, was known for its deaths. We had a lot of deaths. You died a lot of ways. And I don't think, and even when we redid it in 2012, without the restrictions of a floppy, obviously, or a cartridge, we looked at it and we just said, there's so many puzzles here that are so random and so obtuse. Let's toss those out the door. Maybe we can keep the same rooms so people recognize those rooms, but we go ahead and change the puzzles that are to be more intuitive, right? And so where something like Deja Vu is very intuitive, it makes perfect sense. It's a good murder mystery. And, and I think that those puzzles and that's my favorite game. Deja Vu 2 is excellent as well. But Uninvited and Shadowgate were a little bit more obtuse. And, that just goes back to just us being Dungeons & Dragons guys who were just making interesting rooms and stuff. And we really didn't know. Right. And so, our goal as we got older, even Carl and I, when we're working on the second, our second VR title, and we're always saying to ourselves, does this make sense? Is this obtuse? Is this too difficult? Is this too easy? It's that constant, making adventure games. You don't have to, it's like compared to an RPG. An RPG, there's so much balance that you have to deal with, right? Just balancing out the characters and balancing out the monsters and everything. Well, that's tough. That's tough work. For adventure games, it's just balancing out. Is this, that, trying to find that fine line between this puzzle is driving me crazy and, oh, I solved it. And okay, I feel good about that, so it's definitely Shadowgate had its share of, and Uninvited had its share of, obtuse things that I think, were just showed a lack of maturity on our part of designers.
I was going to say, I think I've heard it from a lot of other people that, especially kind of early in their career, that you're that kind of in the zone and you're playing the game that much that you kind of get used to it and it feels very easy. So sometimes that's kind of, you overcompensate by making the game more difficult than it should be.
Yeah. And the other thing is that, today, if I'm making like a VR title, for example, I can look at other VR titles and I can see what people did right, did wrong, how to go on that. I once went to a seminar, they talked about innovation. And they said that radical innovation is rarely profitable, but it's incremental innovation that is very profitable. So when you get MySpace out there, it might not be profitable, but Facebook comes in and says, what is it that they did right or they did wrong? And how do we improve on that? And so there was nothing really out there for me to look at, right? At that time. I mean, if I wanted the games that I was playing on the side were things like Dark Castle, and that's not, an adventure game, and so, it's really tough because we didn't know better, and I didn't have contemporaries at that time, and they were coming up and they were doing, Sierra, the stuff that Sierra Online was doing was incredible, but by that time we were out of the adventure game industry as far as ICOM goes.
I know ICOM were very early to the game with CD-ROM titles as well.
Yeah.
In 91, 92. I know Sherlock Holmes and Dracula Unleashed being prime examples of that. And, I think they came out on the CDI, the Philips.
They did Philips CDI. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the FM Towns in Japan.
Yeah, all of those systems that are long forgotten by most people now. But they had a full motion video in there as well. So, thinking about, FMV and CD-ROM, how are ICOM taking advantage of this new technology? Because it seemed like you very ahead of the game there.
Yeah, it really was. And I remember when when Todd Zibnick, our CEO at the time, passed away many years ago, he would say, I like this new technology. I like this new thing. Let's do these CD-ROM things. And so the company, was kind of split at that point of the teams. One team was just working on video technology. And, back in that day, the best you could get to run on that was, it was like 100 pixels by 200 pixels or something, right? That video screen. And we would just sit there and, they hired a crew in Minneapolis, and they hired local actors from there. And, again, the entire crew and makeup and costumes and sets, and it was all built, and the director. And then we had our own director, Ken Chirola, who directed things produced things on our end. And, but the thing was in those Sherlock games, I'm still working on those Sherlock games, funny enough. I have all the source on Laserdisc, and it's all, it's just a matter of getting it out on Steam. But the first 3 games are out, and we're working on the rest. But, what's interesting about those is the fact of movement. You cannot have, it was again, is a compression thing, as long as the actor, if you watch those things, Sherlock and Watson moved very slowly or didn't move at all or whatever. Because, changing pixels, in that video, made those two, those files huge. Again, it was getting it to fit on a CD-ROM, but, those are really fun. At least the Sherlock games. And I was the producer on the Dracula Unleashed game, which, was kind of campy. I think one guy said that the actors went to the Dick Van Dyke School of British Accents, which I thought was really accurate, right? Cockney accents. So I do have fond memories of shooting a lot of that stuff and everything. But yeah, it was really, it was no Night Trap, but it was really a fun time.
Was Dracula Unleashed really meant to be kind of that B-movie style? Because I know that was very kind of back in vogue again in the early 90s.
Yeah, so it was. Obviously, just we didn't have the budget, right, to make it truly, the best shot video or the best acted video. I think our script was a bit stilted. We hired a couple of folks that were working on Vampire the Masquerade, and then our own. We had a designer named Tony Sherman, and Tony did the design. The design was excellent. The design and the puzzles, and we took Sherlock, which is a points-based system, right? I'm gonna go to this location, or I'm gonna send the Baker Street irregulars there, and I'm gonna figure out how many, the fewest number of places that I have to go to gather my clues and then bring it before the magistrate. Here it was. I need to survive a total of 4 days, and I have to visit certain places and certain times, or else I'm going to die. And it was a great design, but a bit campy, sure.
In 1993, Icon was acquired by Viacom.
Right.
What was the transition like between the companies, and what was the change like?
It was pretty brutal. It wasn't anything that they had come in and they weren't really interested in the Sherlock stuff and the Dracula stuff. Obviously, we were finishing up the contracts that we had with NEC, and they just said, hey, we're going to make games, based on either Nickelodeon, MTV, or Paramount properties. And it was interesting because MTV was very cool about it. MTV would come in and they would say, look, this is what we have. We have Beavis and Butthead, right? And we have a number of other things, but we don't know anything about making video games. So we know MTV, and this is back when MTV was playing, videos, right? And then Nickelodeon would come in and say, "Look, we have these other properties, Rocko's Modern Life, and some other things, and we don't know anything about making video games, but we're going to tell you how to do it." And so it was, and then Paramount was just pretty hands off. They were just like, hey, we've got some stuff if you want to make it. And I wanted to make Star Trek, right? But they already had somebody working on that. But I'd actually worked on a prototype for a Star Trek V adventure game using the McVenture engine. But they weren't interested. But so it was it was tough. It was not the most fun years. Although some of the stuff we worked on, I worked on a number of Beavis and Butthead games, which is an absolute blast. But then I worked on a number of other things that, we'll never speak of again. So
was Mike Judge involved?
So in some of the games I worked on, we pulled audio from previous Beavis and Butthead stuff, especially went to trivia stuff, because we would just find Beavis and Butthead saying things like, snakes are cool. Yeah, snakes. And we would be like, okay, let's come up with some sort of trivia answer that uses that particular bit. And those were fun. And then Mike did the stuff for the big Beavis and Butthead adventure that the studio put out, which did really well. But
Virtual Stupidity, was it?
Yeah, and it was just it was a good adventure game, and it was fun. But we just never really got the support from Viacom, and that was the day when the big media companies were coming in and saying, "Hey, let's get in the video game industry because this is cool and fun, and we've got all these properties." In reality, MTV had really one good property, and I enjoyed working on like the Rocko's Modern Life game. That was a fun side scroller for Super Nintendo, but most of the time it was not enjoyable.
Well, that was a really big change for the company, I imagine, going from making your own adventure games to these kind of, very heavily consoleized games like Roadrunner, Daffy Duck, and, for the Super Nintendo. That seems like a bit of a gear change there, if, to put it mildly.
Ask any game developer about working with a licensor and they will pull their hair out, right? It's always a tough thing. And Sunsoft had picked up the rights from Warner Brothers for the Looney Tunes characters. And for some reason, they thought that we could make side scrollers. And so we had this really great team, small team. And basically Sunsoft came and said, can you do something that is as fun and as fast as Sonic the Hedgehog? And I was like, I was the lead designer at that time. And I said, well, I came up with this idea, Roadrunner's Death Valley Rally. And what we'll do is we'll pull stuff from the cartoons, and the goal is to get to the finish line with Roadrunner, and Wile E. Coyote will come in and do his zany Acme bits, right? We had a couple artists, Brian Barbadority did the backgrounds, and Jeff Troutman did the animations, and they were just fantastic. They just looked great. But we had such a small team, and at that point there was no email, right? And so everything went through with fax. And so I would send the design document off, and in one of the cartoons, Wile E. Coyote opens up a box, and written on the box says Bat-Man costume. And he puts it on, it's green leotards with wings, okay? And so one of the things was Wile E. Coyote was going to come in dropping bombs in this Batman costume. But it's not Batman, right? It's this green costume. So I send the design document off, and, next day I get a fax back from Warner Brothers, said everything looks fine except you can't use Batman. Even though we have the rights to Batman, we can't use Batman or Robin or anyone else like that. And I send off a fax back and I say, not using Batman, not interested in Batman. It's from your cartoon, the cartoon that you've produced. He's in green leotards. Thing says Batman. And then the next day I get a fax back that says, sorry, we're not allowed to use the Batman license, blah, blah, blah. So finally, just wised up, wrote, redid the design document that said, Wile E. Coyote flies around in green leotards, approved. So there'd be things like that where you never knew who was on their end checking out their licenses and stuff. But that was a lot of fun. That game did really well. And then we followed that up with Bugs Bunny's Rabbit Rampage, which was a fighting game, and then Duck Dodgers in the 21st Century, which is, Daffy Duck as Dodgers. And so, they were fine. But then an SNES went on its way, and off we went into other stuff.
Well, you mentioned Rocko's Modern Life, and, to this day, that show has still got a cult following.
Yeah.
What memories have you got of working on that?
Yeah. So when we talked about Rocko, and I loved that game, that show, and I was a big cartoon fan just in general, right? Comics and cartoons and all that. But I was trying to figure out, when they were, the best part was that I really wanted, when I designed it, I was just like, we need to put this thing on its head. They wanted a side scroller. And so I wanted to deliver that, but I thought it would be really fun if you were basically invulnerable as Rocko. And Spunky, in the show was a really brain dead dog, right? And so we just said, let's just have Spunky walk through these dangerous levels. And your goal is to keep Spunky alive. And it was kind of unique and it was really fun, right? So, if Spunky was walking towards, lava or something, and there was a platform before it, you had to jump on the other end and teeter-totter him out of there. And it was just a really, fun thing about keeping him alive. So great time. We had an artist, Elisa Kober, who was the artist on that. And it was just a lot of fun to work on that title. Not so much fun after that.
And that was the kind of period that, Nickelodeon started getting really cool. And people were really kind of accepting it. And that was really the start of it. So what was it like working with the Nickelodeon people as well?
Yeah, it was interesting. They're so passionate about how they do things that, at that point they weren't, anything else, that came out of Sesame Street or anything else was not hip and whatever. And I just, I was not, at that point, my son had just been born. I wasn't really, that into, what Nick was doing compared to, stuff that I liked from MTV. So I just don't think I was the right fit.
Well, Shadowgate, I mean, obviously another game that was, had a really loyal following there. And obviously you've had, several remakes over the years. And I know there was an N64 game that you weren't involved with. But you mentioned the Beyond Shadowgate, the original version that came out on the TurboGrafx 16. And that was a side-scrolling platform game. What was kind of the story there then? And what was it a bit trouble trying to get a sequel to Shadowgate out? And why the change in direction?
Well, from what I remember, NEC was right down the road, right? They had put out the TurboGrafx 16, which was a great game machine because you know what? It could play CDs, it could play your music. And they never really advertised that, which I thought was crazy because back in those days, a CD, if you bought a boombox, it was like $1,000, right? And so it was really expensive. And so they had this great machine with terrible games. All they had was Bonk and a few other games. And so they came to us and said, do you want to do some side scrollers and other things? And we said, sure. And so, I don't remember who said it, but they said, hey, why don't we do Beyond Shadowgate and we'll just make it a side scroller and it'll have all the same crazy deaths and all that other stuff. And I really wasn't involved at that point. I wouldn't say I was bitter about it. I was just moved on to other stuff I was working on. I was working on worse titles. So they would say, hey, we got this new game idea called, what was it called? Oh, it was called Camp California. And these rad bears and birds are the mascots of the Beach Boys. We want you to make side scrollers based on this. And, I didn't know a lot of gamers that were interested in the Beach Boys, but that's what I was working on. Right. And then we just had, NEC was just throwing stuff against the wall, just saying, we just need more product. And unfortunately, their, software ended up driving all those the hardware. Right. And they tried to do something with Gary Gygax again, after he got kicked out of, or, left TSR and stuff like that. And that was a disaster. And so it was, at that point, working on projects that were going to pay the bills. And, again, I don't really remember where Beyond Shadowgate came at that point, but I saved the design documents, of the McVenture one and knowing that one day I'll get to them.
Well, in 1998, Viacom shut down what was then Viacom New Media.
Right.
And sold off, a lot of the IPs. So what was kind of your move there then? Did you kind of go to Infinite Ventures? What was kind of the story there?
Yeah. So what happened when I was there is that I had a friend who I had known since 1988. His name was Eugene Evans. And Eugene now is one of the VPs at Wizards of the Coast. And Eugene came to me and when Viacom shut down the New York office, Eugene came to me and said, hey, I know you're still there in Chicago. You're kind of running, at that point I was running that studio at the end there. And he said, can you work with me and Viacom Legal? And I want to reacquire the rights. Eugene was going to acquire the rights to all the stuff I'd worked on. So all the McVentures, the Sherlock Holmes games, Dracula Unleashed is really what Eugene wanted. And I said, sure. So I worked with him to make sure that he was able to get that. And then he said, and once I get this, I'd like to see about putting out some of the McVentures on the Game Boy Color and other things. And so basically I had gone and moved to Virginia, which is where I'm at now, to work on massively multiplayer games. And then Eugene said, do you want to do some of these on the side? And I said, sure. And so I was working, we were porting the games to Game Boy Color and to working again with Kemco and then also working on porting them to things that Eugene said, hey, maybe this will work, maybe this won't. I mean, the games actually were on the Pocket PC and on the Palm and we ported Sherlock to DVD. You can play Sherlock on a DVD player. And we got involved. We were working on Shadowgate Rising for the N64 before Kemco canceled it. And so we were always working on a game called Lands of Shadowgate, which was a turn-based RPG game that would be played over your phone. And so we were doing a lot of stuff there while I was working at a company called Kesmai, working on massively multiplayer games. So that's how we kind of kept Shadowgate and Deja Vu and Uninvited, especially, and Sherlock alive.
Sounds like you're doing some very innovative stuff there as well with DVD titles and games you could play over the phone, and pushing the technology.
Yeah, and we were just trying to figure out what we were always just a little bit ahead of the curve. Again, we talked about innovation, right? We were in that radical innovation bit where it just wasn't profitable, and so later a lot of these things that we had worked on, I think could have been perhaps more profitable had they come a couple of years later. But it was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed doing it at the time. So yeah, it's great.
Well, going back 10 years now, you founded your own company, Zojoy, in 2012. So what was the story there then? And then why did you form your own company?
So from 2003 till 2012, I was designing games for casinos. And so, which is what I still do now. Again, I went back into that industry, but I was doing that. And I left the company that had hired me that was working on that. And I was working for a small startup. And it was at this time that Kickstarter came out, and the Kickstarter for Broken Sword came out. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And so we looked at that. I looked at that and I said, geez, I would love to go back and make some of the games I had made in the past, and without the limitations that I was under with cartridges and floppies. And so I called Eugene up and I said, and Eugene was at that point, the director he was a director at EA, and he was working at a company called Mythic, which did Dark Age of Camelot and a few other games. And so I said, what are you doing with Shadowgate, Uninvited, Deja Vu 2, Sherlock? And he said, nothing. And I said, well, I would like to reacquire those from you. And I want to start my own company, and I want to try to kickstart it. And so he said, yeah, that's great. So we worked out that deal. And I started with Sherlock because I was afraid of kickstarting Sherlock because I was afraid of going out there with Shadowgate, which was obviously my number one license and the one I cared about the most. And so the Sherlock Kickstarter was not good. And part of it was that I didn't know what I was doing. And that's the thing about Kickstarters is you really have to go in knowing what you're doing and what you want, what you think the gamers and the audience, the pledgers want. And so I started Zojoy, and I mentioned to you guys offline that I just found a name generation program, and for 4 hours I wanted a 5-letter name that I could make a .com that was available. And so I thought Zojoy looked cool. I liked the OJO in the middle. I thought that was fun. I thought the Z was cool. I thought the Joy was fun because I wanted to make games that were fun and happy and whatever. And so I started that, and I started calling people that I knew, programmers that I knew, and artists, and just said, let's try doing this, and everybody will make a royalty off of it. And that's kind of how it started. And so the Sherlock Kickstarter was not successful, and then we said, well, let's try it with Shadowgate. And that one we spent a lot more time on figuring it out, a lot more time on what would the rewards be, how do we target this audience, and so I didn't want to make Beyond Shadowgate yet. I wanted to retell Shadowgate again. I wanted to get rid of the obtuse puzzles. I wanted to do all new art. I wanted a soundtrack. I wanted all of that. So I started working my way through ArtStation to find an artist. I found a guy named Chris Cold in Russia. He's fabulous. And his look and feel of it was very dark and very gritty and very speed painty, which I loved. And then I was sitting on the beach at Virginia Beach one day, and I was looking on my phone and listening to YouTube, watching YouTube videos, and I found this guy named Rich Douglas, who was a musician who had taken the Shadowgate theme from the NES and turned it into an orchestral theme. And it just blew my mind. And so I sent him a text right off the bat and said, would you like to work on this? And he did. And so just kind of went through and, we put I think we tried to raise 125,000. I think ultimately we raised 140. We were piggybacking a bit with another Kickstarter. The guys had worked on the Leisure Suit Larry games. And we were sending people to them. They were sending people to us, both of us wanting to go ahead and, they had a much bigger goal. But, and then, yeah, that's kind of reacquired it, started a company, did a Kickstarter, made enough to pay for art and audio and sending out posters and boxes, and then just lived off of ramen noodles while trying to finish it up.
But it's great to see Shadowgate coming back, and a very faithful update of the original game as well for new audiences. And I know there's been a big appetite for more Shadowgate, and very soon we're going to be getting a proper kind of official sequel to the old NES game, aren't we now, with Beyond Shadowgate, which is coming to Kickstarter this month. So give us the spiel then. Tell us a bit about this.
Well, after finishing Shadowgate, I decided to work on kind of a love letter project for myself, kind of a Greek god game called Argonus and the Gods of Stone. And I worked on that with this artist, Adam Mixner, who's fabulous, and a programmer named Thane Bowman. And we had worked on this for 4 and some years and put it out there on Steam, along with 30 other indie titles that launched that weekend. And the game didn't, although it's my favorite game I've ever worked on, it didn't do very well. I mean, it was just beautiful. And it was a really fun adventure game. And I pretty much decided I was done. And so I'm getting to your thing about Beyond Shadowgate. Just give me a sec.
Yeah.
And I figured I was pretty much done. Shadowgate continued to sell. The regular Shadowgate, the 2012 version, continued to sell. And I was looking at licensing Shadowgate and other things out. And people had talked to me over the years about buying my licenses and things and my properties. But I was pretty much done because it was 4 years of, that didn't, the game didn't work and, or didn't, sell. And so, Rich called me up and said, you should get into virtual reality. And I said, look, I have, an HTC Vive headset and, it's fine. It's all right. And they said, no, you need to pick up a Quest. So I picked up a Quest and I said, this is it. I'm going to make VR games. And so we worked for 9 months on a VR prototype of Shadowgate, and it was really cool. And Oculus thought it was cool. And we put that game out. It's done pretty well. And, we were in the middle of starting to work on the next one, which we're still working on, which is Shadowgate VR. That's called Shadowgate VR: The Mines of Mythrock. We're working on Shadowgate VR, the sequel, The Source of Magic. So at this time, one of the designers that had helped me a bit on Argonus, his name is Chris Mosley. Chris came to me and said, "Hey, there are these guys that work for a company called Graph Metal. And they put out these homages, these adventure games, and they put them out for free on, was it itch.io? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the website, yeah.
Yeah, they put it out there, and they even say they're an homage to the McVentures, and they're really great. And there's this guy, Jeff Kanan, who is fabulous, a pixel artist. We should see if they're interested in doing Beyond Shadowgate. And Chris would say to me, you have that design doc, right? I'm like, yeah, it's 4 binders. It's, it's like 16 inches tall total, right? If I stacked them up. And he said, we should do that game. And let's do that. And I said, I don't know. So he said, I'll find out all the information. I'll contact these guys. So he said, these are the guys. This is their Twitter account. Send them a Twitter. Sound like an old man. It's like my mom. Send a Twitter. But he's like, send a tweet and see if they're interested. So I sent off a tweet and I just said, would you be interested in working on Beyond Shadowgate? And immediately they got back to me and Jeff's like, I would love to work on that. And so we started talking about it and he started doing some designs even before we had a contract, and Chris had gotten involved and it was just stars aligning, and the stuff he was doing was beautiful. And it's, it's stunning pixel art. And so I said, well, let's do this. And they're like, well, we have a musician that's going to do, a guy named Ori Faulkner. He's going to do the chip tunes for it. And I was like, that sounds great. So we worked out a contract. And if you've seen the video that I did, the presentation video, it's 4 times, these guys just keep going. It's 4 times the size of Shadowgate. It's got a section in it that basically has a haunted mansion in it because they loved Uninvited so much. It's got, all these NPCs. It's got a day-night cycle. It's got all this stuff that, we never had before. And is really great. And so, during all this time, another designer that I've worked with, and I'm a guy named Chris Geisett. Chris ends up coming to me and saying, I want to make a Shadowgate board game. And I don't have a publisher and I want to make a board game. So I want to make this Shadowgate the Living Castle board game. We're going to use art from Shadowgate 2012 game, 2014 game. And then I'm going to do the Kickstarter. And I said, that's fine. Go ahead. Because I love Chris. And so Chris Geisett, he does this Kickstarter. It's not doing very well, but he is pounding the pavement and going to Gen Con, all these cons. He's showing the game. He's spent all this money to have the board game made. And then this company, Trick or Treat Studio, comes in and says, we're going to publish that. So in fact, I've got copies sitting right here. So that comes out at the same time. Chris Geisett's a super Shadowgate fan. And he says, I would love to have a Beyond Shadowgate cartridge. And I said, one that actually works in an NES. And he's like, no. Just, I want a cartridge and a box and a map. And I want all of that stuff.
Just a collectible.
Yes. He wants to collect because he's got this shrine, which is crazy, but I love him. And so I said, okay, well, the only way we're going to do that is if we do a Kickstarter, because I got to believe that, look, here's the thing. There's a Shadowgate Facebook page. Anytime I post on there about Shadowgate stuff, people are interested. They find the VR stuff interesting. They find the board game interesting, but all they really care about is NES Shadowgate, and they care about Beyond Shadowgate. And so I said, well, there's probably a good number of people that would be really interested in a Kickstarter to get that kind of stuff, to get a cloth map, to get the box. And then Chris Mosley comes in and says, I found the original artist for the NES box. He wants to do work with us. And I went, okay. So we got him to do the art for the box. And then Chris Geisett said, how about a bigger collector box that will hold that box and a map, and we could do these collector coins that I work with the guys at Goliath Coins. We'll do those. And I'm like, yeah, all right, we could do that. And they're like, and if the game is successful, we'll port it to the Switch. And so the Kickstarter ends up coming about because Kickstarters are tough to run. And you guys have run one, and you know what that's like. Yeah. And so I just said, well, if we have enough updates and we have enough cool swag, and what are we going to be paying for? What are people pledging for? Well, they're pledging for the game. Okay. What do we need? Well, we still need to pay Ori for the audio. So that'll go to that. And we need to do this swag and stuff. And the rest of the stuff we'll fund. So it's a very, I think we're going to be asking for $25,000, which gets to the minimum of audio plus the minimum number of units to create, that manufacturers have to make, right? Because you can't just make 10 cartridges, right? You have to make like 300. So it's like, I said, yeah, let's do that for people that really love that. We'll be open, honest right off the bat. We're making this so that you can have really cool swag. You'll help us finish the game. We'll have very few tiers so that you know exactly what you're getting into. And so that launches on February 18th.
Well, Dave, I was going to wish you luck with it, but I don't think you'll need it. The Shadowgate community is so big, and it feels like now is, I don't think there's ever been a better time to be a Shadowgate fan with all the stuff that's happening right now. And obviously this game that, people have been waiting almost 40 years for an official, sequel to the NES game. So Beyond Shadowgate, like you said, live on Kickstarter from February the 18th. You can notify on launch on Kickstarter right now. So I'll put a link to the project page in our show notes so everyone can click through to it as well. Dave, I wish you all the best with it, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing some memories with us this week. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, it has been lovely, and I do appreciate you guys having me, and love to talk about it, and thanks for letting me share some of those memories, the things I can remember.